Everyone's patience in the past couple weeks here. I was on vacation. I just finished my first triathlon, so I've been a little bit off the grid. But with that said, we're about 8 days away from college football season. Obviously, the first game is going to be Iowa State and Kansas State week 0, which I'm super excited about as well. And I'm sure a game that all of you guys are going to tune into. But for this segment, I definitely want to turn my attention to Auburn. And, for right and wrong reasons, they've gotten a lot of attention this season, and rightfully so. That there should be a lot of pressure on them this season. Auburn has been ranked 71st nationally in offense in his first 2 seasons under Hugh Freeze. And for anybody who's watched Hugh Freeze, it's certainly surprising to see that type of statistic too. But at the same time too, the quarterback play hasn't been there, and at least to me, when I watched Auburn last year, I've just never seen a team that just found so many different ways to lose games. It almost was reminiscent of Nebraska back in, 2021 or 2022, where they just went like 3-9 that last season under Scott Frost. I forget what season that was. But in any event, I mean, when you watched Auburn, they just found so many different ways to lose, whether you want to talk about a red zone turnover, a missed field goal, another unfortunate turnover, an interception. It just seems like there were so many misfortunes there. And you just kind of have to ask yourself, hey, will they ever really kind of get past that too? Because even though Auburn went 5-7 last season, they left a couple wins on the table. At least for me, the most memorable ones are obviously earlier into the season when you want to talk about the Cal game, who I've covered extensively on the channel. You could talk about the Arkansas game, and probably one of the more memorable ones too. I'll even throw Missouri and the Vanderbilt game out there that I would argue that they should have won as well. But moving forward now, and you look at this team full picture, 65% returning production, 67% on offense, 63 on defense. And, objectively speaking, if you're just looking in terms of on paper, not all the stuff I just routed off in terms of Auburn, you've really got to love what they're doing right now, particularly offensively. And I know that's going to be a big question mark, and I'm going to get to Jackson Arnold in a second, but I really love what they're doing in the wide receiver room, because I'd see nothing but potential and just so many guys who are just so freaking explosive. I mean, if you want to talk about sophomore receivers, Coleman and Malcolm Simmons, who combined for roughly 1,000 yards last season, who I anticipate are even going to be even better this season. And not to mention too, Eric Singleton Jr. coming from Georgia Tech. That kid is a dog. He's a large frame. He's going to really help out in the red zone. And I think most importantly, what Singleton's going to do is he's going to open up more opportunities for Coleman and Simmons. And I think it's going to be a really electric offense to watch this season. And obviously, too, we can talk about a couple other things, too. The offensive line, which is something I always like to cover on the program. They returned four starters. And they also brought in a couple transfers, too. You could talk about Mason Murphy from USC and also Xavier Champlain from Virginia Tech, who I think could also be a nice depth piece as well. Now, granted, you do lose Jarquez Hunter. He's no longer – he's longtime running back there and no longer there. But I anticipate Auburn being a lot more of a pass-happy team, even more now than ever, knowing that Hunter's not there. So with that said, I mean, we can talk about the elephant in the room now, right? We can talk about the quarterback room. And essentially what Freeze has done, and, it's unfortunate too, because he threw Peyton Thorne and Hank Brown a lot under the bus last season. And I'm not saying that some of the criticism isn't warranted, but what I'm getting at is you just can't sit there and do that to your quarterback every single week and expect good things to happen. Now, granted, do I think Peyton Thorne and Hank Brown are more talented than Jackson Arnold and Ashton Daniels and Tanner Bailey and Deuce Knight that they brought in? No, the quarterback room is way stronger now, 100%. But at the same time, I guess what I'm kind of questioning with myself is, can Hugh Freeze strike the balance between obviously having large expectations to your quarterback and having this, that, and the other happening too, but also being able to play that line where can Jackson Arnold, will he have that confidence this season? I think that's been a big kind of turning point. Even when Hugh Freeze talked in some of his interviews, particularly in SEC Media Day, that was kind of a big question that they kind of honed in on was, hey, how do you get Jackson Arnold more confident, especially when you look and you say to yourself, hey, I mean, this kid was heavily heavily recruited going into 23 recruiting class. He was number 3 prospect overall. And, he's the type of guy that in many ways he has everything you could possibly want in a quarterback. He's athletic. He plays with intensity. He's a good leader. And, he has a really strong arm. It's just, and I think I would also argue too that I think Jackson Arnold, and even I'll throw Ashton Daniels to this in this discussion too. If you haven't watched Ashton Daniels, go watch some Stanford tape, particularly the Stanford Colorado comeback from a couple seasons ago. Watch that game and you can tell me what you think in the comments about Ashton Daniels. But in any event, both those quarterbacks, I think, fit Hugh Freeze's mold a lot better in terms of their offense, in terms of Peyton Thorne and Hank Brown. I think Peyton Thorne, it's not that he's not a non-athletic quarterback. It's just I think he is a lot more comfortable with more of a pocket passer type of dude, and also someone you can kind of put in some RPO packages here and there. But when you have those two guys there, I mean, it definitely is nice to have that insurance policy too. And then you have Deuce Knight in there as well, who is going to be a really strong freshman. And, depending on whether he sticks around or not, that remains to be seen. But at the same time too, we could talk a little bit about the defense for a second too. And, I don't want to, I'll be careful how I phrase this, but I am a big DJ Durkin fan. I'm not going to get into the whole thing when he was the head coach at Maryland. We're not going to get into that. We're just going to talk about what he's doing as a defensive coordinator. As a defensive coordinator, he's freaking phenomenal. Whether you want to talk about when he was at Texas A&M or what he's doing right now. Because the one thing that Auburn hasn't had any issues with, it's particularly on defense. Now, granted, I think it's worthy to criticize them on third down a little bit. I think there are a couple games that you can argue when I rattled off the Arkansas game, the Cal game. There were definitely some opportunities where if they could have got off the field a little bit earlier, that we'd probably be having a different conversation in terms of them being instead 5-7, maybe an 8-4 team, for example. So that could be a different conversation. But Auburn defense last year, they ranked 28th nationally, only given about 21 points per game, and they tied for 9th in yards allowed per rushing as well. So, and also too, they do return one of the top pass rushers, and not only on the team, but also I think in the SEC, I think somebody in the SEC as well is Coldrick Falk, who tied the team for lead in sacks with 7, and he also had 11 tackles for loss last year. So I anticipate him even going off more again. And I'm also kind of curious too how these SEC offensive lines really try to stop him as well, because I think in many ways DJ Durkin has really done a phenomenal job. And I am kind of curious too. Let's say Auburn really does have this turnaround of being an 8-4, 9-3 season. I wouldn't be surprised if people call DJ Durkin and get him to be a head coach again. And I think if he were to be a head coach again, I think it'd be a really big hurt for Hugh Freeze as well. But let's talk a little bit about who they're returning as well, which is what I'm excited about, particularly in the secondary. Now, granted, I can talk a little bit about how I think in a perfect world, I wish they would have, tackled a little bit more in terms of the linebacking room. I would have liked to see them get a couple more transfers in there just to have a little bit more depth. But I think that issue is largely being overshadowed by the quarterback controversy and obviously just Hugh Freeze being Hugh Freeze, But if you want to talk about the secondary, I mean, there's some really strong players that are coming back. I mean, you have Caleb Harris, Caden Lee, Sylvester Smith, and Champ Anthony as well, who is going to be really a key playmaker for them. And most importantly, when you're playing in the SEC, I mean, that's going to be the real difference when you're in those third down situations, when the game's on the line, really having that focal point as well. And don't get me wrong, they've really done a solid job at not only recruiting as well, we'll give them credit for it, but particularly the amount of impressive work they've done in the portal. And it's a testament to Hugh Freeze as a recruiter, most importantly. Now, granted, Auburn's always going to have money to a degree, and we could sit here and rattle off and talk about, some of their questionable head coaching hires that they made in the past couple of years. And am I sitting here saying that they're an elite team? No, they're not an elite team. However, there's no question in my mind that the offense has gotten better, that Jackson Arnold and Ashton Daniels fit Hugh Freeze's system way better. They, most importantly, just have a way more complete team and probably the best roster they've had under Hugh Freeze. Now, am I saying that if Hugh Freeze should get fired next year? No, I'm not. I'm not saying that. I think at the very least, if you're Auburn, I need to see at least a 7-8 win season. And obviously, that is probably a little bit low. I think if you talk to people at Auburn or Auburn fans, they're going to sit there and tell you, "Oh, if we don't go 9-3 or 10-2, he's out the door." And I'm just like, I don't know about all of that, but I think what else kind of fascinates me about this Auburn team as well is that Auburn is an underdog going into their opener against Baylor now. The line, according to what I've seen last, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but Baylor is now a 1.5 point favorite versus Auburn, which I kind of find pretty fascinating too. And before I wrap up the segment, I definitely just want to talk about their schedule real quick because down at Waco, Texas, that Baylor game is going to be a difficult game. Sawyer Robinson and Dave Ornata and Jake Spavital, they're finally kind of getting that together. So I think that's going to be a huge test for this Auburn team. And I have to tell you, if Baylor were to spank them or something like that, which I don't think it's going to happen, I think it's going to be a really close game. And quite frankly, I think it's going to be a pretty offensive heavy game. Then it could be fascinating to kind of see what the narrative kind of turns into. But I'm really high on this Auburn team, and I think there's a lot of reason to really be optimistic. And I know people say that every year, but to me, this just feels different. And going into the schedule real quick, I'm not going to take too much more of your time here. But when I look and say, okay, you got Baylor on the road, then you have to go to Oklahoma and College Station after that. So you have really 3 key road games at the beginning of the season. So Auburn's going to be tested early, and I would argue that if any team really needs to get tested early, it's Auburn, especially with all the misfortunes and all the nonsense that kind of happened to them last season. I think it's really important that they really kind of get there early and being able to hopefully take care of some of these games too. Because if you're Auburn, I think you have to find a way to at least go 4-1 here. Obviously, if you can start off the season 4-0 and then you lose to Texas A&M, I mean, that's not really the end of the world. But in terms of the rest of their schedule, I mean, it's relatively manageable. Now, granted, Georgia and Missouri are always going to be two really difficult games. They played Missouri last season, and hopefully they kind of come back and maybe redeem themselves there. But you have a couple tricky games here. I mean, playing Arkansas on the road is always going to be a little bit of a challenge. And also playing Vanderbilt's going to be a little bit of a challenge too. And, it's always kind of weird how the SEC kind of does their non-conference games because you have a random game versus Mercer on November 22nd. And then obviously you have the Iron Bowl on the 29th. So, I mean, does Auburn definitely have a cakewalk of a schedule? Absolutely not. I think there's definitely some challenges here. But at the same time too, if I'm an Auburn fan, I'm kind of happy that they're getting tested early with the game versus Baylor, with a team like Oklahoma who has so much hype this year with John Mateer. So I'm really fascinated to see how this goes. But like I said, I really predict that this Auburn team, at least defensively, is still going to be really solid. I like what they've done in the transfer portal. Jackson Arnold still remains to be seen, but at the very least, even if Jackson Arnold does get hurt, you have a guy like Ashton Daniels you can bring in immediately. So I think either way, I think there's more reason to be confident. And especially when you have guys like Eric Singleton and Coleman to throw to, I really don't see any reason whatsoever why they can't win at least eight wins this season.